Gotcha.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another Monster Hunter World video. This is Thegameconomist, and today I'm going to rant about some of the things I wish the developers over at Capcom had done differently with Monster Hunter World. That doesn't mean I hate Capcom or that I dislike Monster Hunter. It's more like I really enjoy the game so much that I've played it long enough to have a lot of thoughts on how it could have been or can be improved. Before we begin, I want to mention that you mostly won't need to watch the screen in order to get the most out of this video. It's kind of more of a podcast, so feel free to just listen. Also, if you find my talking is too slow, YouTube does give you a way to speed up the play speed of the video. Problem number one, we're going to jump right into the heart of things: the lack of communication about an expansion or G rank. Of course, I'm going to make this the first thing we talk about. There hasn't been enough content, and if Capcom just fixed this one issue, then I wouldn't have had time to make a video like this because I'd be too busy fighting Orochi Kirin and Elatrion. But it's been a long 4 months since Capcom released the Behemoth, and unfortunately the Behemoth only offered one weapon, which I predicted back then would cause him to become irrelevant pretty much too quickly for players, and that's basically exactly what happened. No one needs to farm the Behemoth for parts because they built the Draken Armor, realized that now half of all their builds are just going to be the Draken Armor, and then they got bored with the game and left. One of the things I've been doing since very early on in Monster Hunter World's life cycle is tracking the weapon popularity, and one of the interesting things you notice is that every time World receives a really cool weapon, like the Dark Devourer for the heavy bowguns or the Wyverian Ignition Greatsword, you see a jump in popularity for that weapon class. But over the last 4 months, there's been almost no change in weapon popularity because everyone already built the available weapons and then they got bored with them. So you have this two-pronged problem where there already aren't enough monsters in the game, and then one of the 3 new monsters we did get, the Behemoth, didn't even offer any interesting rewards other than an armor set that made many previous sets and even new Gamma sets obsolete, for example, the Teostra Gamma set. The lack of content in Monster Hunter World is the biggest problem Capcom is facing, and when you have too serious of a content drought, you let other game developers move in on your player base, which, by the way, is a problem I think FromSoft's Dark Souls and Bloodborne series will face pretty soon as well. Now, there may be a good reason why we haven't seen any new content since the beginning of August, but the other part of the issue is that Capcom doesn't really communicate what their plans are, and that leaves players having to assume the worst, or they develop their own expectations that go unmet. Whatever the case is, it's not a great way to build positive regard with your fanbase. An interview with Monster Hunter World producer Ryozo Sugimoto, did I say that right, quotes him saying that Monster Hunter World will not be a games as a service type of game, and by that he meant that they won't support the game for like 5 years after launch. But then the game goes on to basically be a games as a service type of game, with new microtransactions that are sold during the seasonal events, and the event quests are made unavailable so that they have a reason for you to come back during those seasonal events. I have more to say about this down the list. Problem number 1 was about the obvious lack of monsters and the lack of communication about future content. Problem number 2, all 4 of the new monsters are clones. Okay, so problem number 1 kind of segues right into this issue. Most of the core player base for Monster Hunter World figured out a long time ago that the new monsters were all clones of already existing monsters. Devil Joe is just a reskinned Anjanath. Kulve Taroth is an enormous Great Jagras. Lunastra is just a very annoying clone of Teostra, and Behemoth, despite receiving mostly positive reviews, was made using the Nergigante skeleton. The problem with having all of your new monsters essentially being made out of already existing assets is that your players will begin to recognize the experience doesn't actually feel that different, and then they're going to wonder what took so long to release the content in the first place. Now, part of this is because the player doesn't understand how much work actually goes into making and releasing a monster into a AAA title. But then we watch players on the PC modding new monsters into the game by themselves faster than the actual development team, and it's hard not to feel like they've taken too long doing too little. So how would you guys describe the root of this problem? Could it have been that Capcom wasn't prepared for the amount of success Monster Hunter was going to have, and they already sent their core team off to work on something else? Maybe Monster Hunter World 2 is being worked on, maybe G-Rank, or even Devil May Cry. Even the remaining monsters on the leaked list, Alatreon and Orochi Kirin, are not going to require new skeletons to make. This means no bat-like monsters, no new amphibian monsters, no gorillas, no giant insects. It just seems like Capcom doesn't even have the time to import ideas from their older games, which to me just seems like they're missing an opportunity to sell more of their product despite Monster Hunter World being their best-selling title ever made. I'm not sure how to interpret the situation other than a missed opportunity, and we'll have to see what comes down the pipes in the next 2 months to alleviate the situation, or if there really are no more plans after Orochi Kirin and Alatreon. So problem number 2 is that the new monsters we've received and probably will receive aren't exactly that new anyways. Problem number 3, the archTempered monsters were a mistake. Okay, you've probably already heard me say this before, but the archTempered monsters were completely unnecessary and pretty much just filler content that Capcom could drip to us. I think on paper it could have been a lot of fun, but the developers failed to make the archTempered monsters feel like a new level of complex difficulty. Instead, the monsters felt almost exactly the same, but with more damage and more health. This is what I like to call artificial difficulty. It's the practice of changing simple things like raising the health and damage of a monster until they become a bullet sponge, and then fighting that monster feels more like a chore rather than an exciting interaction. The problem isn't that players don't like extremely high difficulty. Actually, I think it's through extreme activities that you develop a hardcore scene with players who really devote themselves to a franchise, and I think that's exactly who Monster Hunter should have been catering to from the start, because they have the potential to do it. Meaning challenges like the Behemoth and archTempered Xeno'jiiva probably should have been in the game since launch, rather than the pushover version of Xeno'jiiva that we actually got. So in terms of archTempered monsters, Capcom has mostly just given us fluff, and only for 2 weeks at a time, so that they could then take it away and give it back to us during the seasonal events. And each time we get a seasonal event, we get a new handler outfit to buy. So it's hard to say Capcom isn't just dangling an archTempered carrot in front of us and keeping us around and then selling us microtransactions later. Even archTempered Xeno'jiiva, which so many people gave praise to, was mostly only fun because no one was fighting the old version of him unless they really had to. Regular Xeno'jiiva was extremely boring. There was no tempered version where you could grind him over and over again whenever you wanted to, and no one would have done that anyways unless he was also giving out warped face stones. So archTempered Xeno'jiiva already had a big advantage of no one really remembering or caring about his fight. The more you realize this, the more it feels like his success as an archTempered monster is really just a correction of how bad he was in the first place, rather than the implementation of fresh content. In fact, if you haven't done this, go back and try to fight regular Xeno'jiiva. He's really extremely similar to archTempered Xeno'jiiva, other than a few new moves that archTempered Xeno'jiiva was given. But yeah, the fights are essentially the same, so all the praise he received when he came out, I don't really feel like he was worthy of it, you know what I mean? He really is just the same monster. Also keep this in mind, we had just finished fighting the worst archTempered monster so far, archTempered Zora Magdaros, and then we had 2 weeks of nothing to do. Almost anything would have felt fresh at that point. archTempered Xeno'jiiva should have been in the game at launch, and I'm not sure Capcom should actually receive a lot of praise for adding him in almost a year later. He's essentially the boss fight we deserved. Problem number 3 is all about how archTempered monsters are just a way to string us along to these seasonal events, which conveniently also offer handler outfits that you can buy as a microtransaction. Problem number 4. There's no endgame currency economy. Okay, this is just a quick one. Basically, I have an ungodly amount of dead monster parts sitting in a chest and nothing to do with any of it, as well as enough Zenny for me to retire comfortably and never have to monster hunt for the rest of my imaginary Monster Hunter life. My name's Thegameconomist, so I felt like it's probably my job to talk about how there's really no endgame economy to Monster Hunter World. You start the game out basically starving for more Zenny, right? Absolutely starving for it. You are being told by Eric's Gaming to sell your might seats that you tediously grew every time a quest ended. But then, once you're done with some of the core parts of your builds, purchasing it, upgrading it, suddenly the need for Zenny falls off hard, and it's almost like I have to go out and find ways to waste it now. Obviously, there needs to be some extremely expensive things in the game to buy so that I can sell my spare monster parts and can finally walk around in hunter gear made entirely out of Zenny. Where's the Zenny Gamma set? Jokes aside, it's a serious issue, and it wouldn't be that hard to solve. When earning endgame rewards no longer matter, this is just another reason why people would stop playing. So problem number 4 is all about the lack of endgame loot. Problem number 5, lack of social loot, power fantasy, and a white whale. This issue segues into a deeper discussion about rewards in general. It's one thing to say that I don't have anything to spend my millions of Zenny on. However, it's another thing to say I don't have anything to flaunt to my friends or to other players online. Some of you may have been big fans of Borderlands and Destiny 1 like I was, and those games really innovated a lot in the idea of loot-driven games. At least Borderlands did. I'm not sure I would say Destiny innovated as much, but they sometimes succeeded in implementing those innovations that we found in Borderlands. Destiny had especially incredible artwork when they weren't suffering from a content drought or trying to sell us microtransactions. Destiny 1 especially innovated in the idea of having large group raids that felt mysterious and yes, very rewarding. Jump over to Monster Hunter World. There must be a couple hundred weapons in the game, maybe even close to 1,000, but how many of those weapons do you actually feel like showing to your friends? None of them, because they were all extremely easy to obtain, including the Kulve Taroth loot, which is rewarded by suffering, not by expressing skill. I have a lot to say about her later. That's why I wanted to talk about 3 types of rewards that Monster Hunter never implemented, and they really should, because this is also a loot game, meaning most of the gameplay revolves around killing a monster and then collecting the loot that it drops. That's a loot game. The first is social loot. This is a reward which does not change the amount of power you have, but it makes you cooler than everyone else. Think of shiny Pokemon. They almost never show up, but they can, and they're literally there for you to show off to your friends and make them jealous. They don't harm PvP balance or anything else in the game at all. So basically there are many ways Monster Hunter could and should implement social loot. For example, this is just one example. They could add a way for you to add new skins to your weapon and then make those new skins a social reward. Players would go nuts trying to farm for these, especially if you gave them as bad of a drop rate as attack decorations. No one can see if you have 7 attack decorations, but everyone can see if you have a special skin for your longsword. Then we have the issue of power fantasy. Capcom implements a very weak form of power fantasy where all of the power is based upon the stats of your weapon and whether you can build crit boost with 100% affinity, white sharpness, peak performance, attack boost, and agitator, and probably a set bonus skill, right, like Master's Touch. Is the least exciting way to feel powerful. I really think Capcom should consider adding weapons to the game that have signature, unique moves that other weapons in the same weapon class don't have, and then if they wanted to, they could make that particular weapon harder to obtain. The fact that each weapon is a perfect clone of every weapon in its own weapon class makes all of the weapons feel less powerful and less interesting, because then you would only need to pull a calculator out, crunch some numbers, and easily point to the 5 weapons that everyone should be using. In fact, with a lot of raw damage weapons, it's not even 5, it's more like 2 weapons. This is an important thing for Capcom to think about because a lot of players choose to main only a few weapon classes, maybe even only one, like a hammer main, and so the lack of variety in that class and the calculation to optimal damage output really sucks the fun out of feeling powerful. It would be better to have 5 equally powerful hammers, each with a unique moveset, rather than 30 hammers where 28 of them are never used. We just received the Bristly Grudge, and it's technically new content, but how many hammer mains out there got excited for it? I'm guessing almost none of them, and that's the problem. Finally, I'll wrap this one up by talking about white whales. For anyone who played Destiny 1, you probably remember the Mythoclast. It was insanely hard to earn because you had to have real skill in the game, even if you were cheesing Atheon. That was difficult back then. And if it dropped for you, you went nuts a little bit because everyone knew what a social status weapon it was, thanks to how good the weapon looked and how powerful it actually was as well. So we've just talked about social rewards and power fantasy. A white whale reward is something that combines both of those things, and then it's almost impossible to obtain. And in my opinion, literally every game should consider having something like this. It's the ultimate cool reward, and it keeps you playing and playing and playing, the same way Moby Dick kept obsessively hunting the white whale. Monster Hunter World definitely doesn't have one of these because it also doesn't have social rewards or a strong power fantasy, so it's basically on square one of implementing something like it. But if they ever were to truly implement an addictive loot system, I think Monster Hunter could evolve to become one of the top non-PvP game franchises around. Alright, that was a lot. Problem number 5 was all about the lack of an addictive loot system. Problem number 6. A lack of fashion choices. Luckily, this isn't as complex of an issue as the previous one, so will be done in less time. Basically, Capcom decided they didn't want there to be much layered armor in the game. I'm not 100% sure who made this decision. I'm guessing the reasoning might have been that the developers wanted us to consider using full armor sets as an actual theme for combat. But literally no one is doing this. I think the most times I've run into someone using a full armor set from one monster is when I myself go into a quest wearing something like full Kulve Taroth armor or full Devil Joe armor, and it's only for making my videos. I would never actually play that way because it's just so bad. So layered armor is now a real thing over on the PC because they have mods, meaning Capcom could allow us all to have layered armor for every set, they just won't. Maybe it's another thing they want to drip to us in the future, I'm not sure, but I think this was a big mistake because I know how much players love fashion, and Capcom shouldn't be waiting for Monster Hunter World to become an old game before allowing players to dress the way they want to in a video game. Problem number 6, therefore, is all about releasing the layered armor sets. Problem number 7 is a big one. Poorly designed multiplayer. Okay, so this should be a huge topic that I could talk about for about an hour because there is a very long list of problems I have with the design and the experience of the multiplayer, but it's also kind of a dry topic as well, meaning it's not quite as fun to think about. It's more like one of those issues you only think about when there's something going wrong. Otherwise, no one would really get excited about talking about the system being used to connect players over the internet. I mean, somebody does, like a network administrator or something like that, so whoever it is that actually implements the multiplayer in a video game, but you and I, the actual gamer, we're not that interested in talking about it. Needless to say, Capcom chose a very crappy system for doing this. A system so bad, the last time I used one like it was in Gears of War 1 specifically, and this was 13 years ago. It's terrible, but they shouldn't spend time fixing it because we desperately need new monsters and new maps instead, so they better be throwing all of their developers at that. Some things that I think they could fix about the multiplayer is more about the actual experience. For example, when a player lags out or leaves, the monster difficulty should scale back down. I also think Zenny rewards should not be affected by the number of players or if anyone died. Player tripping in friendly fire sounds funny on paper, but is actually very annoying, and just another reason not to join up with noobs. You lose your palico in multiplayer. You used to have AFK players who were just feeding, and there was, for some reason, no auto boot system. However, nowadays, you just don't even really have anyone playing the multiplayer anymore. So yeah, there are plenty of things to fix about the online experience, and there are no social rewards to show off to everyone as well. We already talked about that. So Capcom could actually do a lot to improve the online experience. One thing I would especially like to see is the removal of shared lives. They should change it so that you all have one life, and if you die, you can leave the match or wait for someone to revive you. That way, one bad player can't end the quest for 3 good players. Okay, so problem number 7 is about fixing the terrible multiplayer experience. Problem number 8 is about the lack of boss-type monsters. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is how we only just now got archTempered Zenitjiva, who I would count as a boss-level difficulty. And before archTempered Zenitjiva, we had the Extreme Behemoth, who gives you completely pointless rewards, and who's only around every now and then, which is going to be the same case for archTempered Zenitjiva right after the current seasonal event ends. My argument is that players really do need something hardcore to work on or to fight against when they've reached the end of the end game, and they don't really have anything else to do other than practice their crazy skills. I think some of you will respond by saying that I should wait for G rank, but I've already paid $60 for this title and would have loved it if it shipped with up to 4 extremely difficult monsters to fight. Maybe Capcom felt they needed the game to be toned down for a casual audience. I feel like it's always possible to appeal to both your casual and your hardcore audience. It just requires more work and investment in your game, which maybe they didn't want to afford. Either way, Extreme Behemoth and archTempered Zenitjiva are in the game right now. I believe that they shouldn't continue to rotate, they should just be in the game permanently as optional quests, and Capcom should move quickly to add 2 more monsters of this difficulty. My vote is for the archTempered Nergigante and archTempered Gyratotus to be boss-like to be boss-like monsters. Of course, we'll probably have that situation occur with, what do you guys think, an archTempered Orochi Kirin and an archTempered Elatrion? I bet we'll see something like that happen. The lack of extremely difficult monsters, alongside all of the other things I've mentioned, is just another problem that causes a part of your player base to get bored and leave. Problem number 9. Kulve Taroth grinding and decoration drop rates. Kulve Taroth is so bad, she's the only monster to get her own spot on the list. So here we are at the Kulve Taroth issue. Honestly, I have so much to say about her that I already did in 2 other rant videos. Let's just say that I'm not a big fan of what Capcom did with her. Capcom decided to give Kulve Taroth so many valuable RNG weapons that would drop at such a poor rate that you would have to kill her probably over 1,000 times in order to farm them all. And I guarantee you, Capcom's developers who set the RNG rate, they knew about this. Somebody sat down and was told how long players should have to fight Kulve Taroth before they can complete their weapon collections, and I strongly disagree with the amount they decided on. So yeah, when you're working on something like this, somebody actually has to put in the formula for the drop rate on these weapons, and I'm sure they're not just randomly choosing a number, they're actually calculating how long it's going to take for all of the weapons to drop, and they have chosen a really ungodly amount of time, either because they have a philosophy where they don't want their players to finish their collection, or because they really do believe that their players should play for over 2,000 hours, like maybe 2,500 hours, I'm not sure. However, I am sure that it's one thing to not have enough monsters in the game, and it's really another thing to give just one of those monsters a quarter of all the valuable weapons, and to then make it as stingy of an RNG loot system as possible. Similar to what Hex discovered with the drop rates on decorations, Capcom is not afraid to give us incredibly unrealistic drop rates, and I think they're so extreme that they aren't even fun. Right? Like, that's a topic I've heard both Bungie and Gearbox talk extensively about, and that's the balancing of drop rates. For example, why shouldn't attack boost decorations have an even lower 0.01% drop rate? Then when you get one, it would be such a surprise and so special, wouldn't it? Wrong. I've gotten bored trying to obtain an attack boost decoration, and I've stopped caring, and maybe I've moved on to the next game, or used an exploit, or a mod to obtain this decoration instead. This is exactly how I've been feeling about Kulve Taroth lately, and it doesn't surprise me. At this point, I think Capcom could make a huge improvement to relic weapons by having all archTempered monsters drop a few of them each time you defeat them, so I can finally farm for relic weapons without losing my mind. Maybe Capcom thinks having such a large pool will guarantee that the sessions will remain busy when the event comes out each time, and it's kind of true. I do join a session, but I definitely solo Kulve Taroth in every session that I join, and if it didn't require sessions in the first place, then I wouldn't join them because it makes almost no difference to me. Kulve Taroth's siege mode mechanics were unnecessarily clumsy and ineffective at getting me to participate in genuine multiplayer experiences, since having other players in my match almost always slowed me down or caused me to lose the match entirely. Anyways, I'm not going to go into full details about it again, because I already have, and I'm getting tired of talking about Kulve Taroth. Finally, problem number 10 is going to be an easy one. There aren't enough maps. Okay, problem number 10 is going to be short. There aren't enough maps, and we don't even play on them at an equal rate. We actually spend the majority of our time on the Elder's Recess because Behemoth shows up on it, all of the Elder Dragons show up on it, which by extension also means all of the archTempered monsters show up on it. Deviljho, Basilgeuse, Azure Rathalos, Dodogama, Uragan, Lavasioth, and a bunch of other event quests show up on the Elder's Recess as well. The reason a lack of maps should be listed as a separate issue is because it's gotten so bad that simply adding in new monsters might not actually make the game feel that new, and I think most players would love to see a new ice map added to the game. I know I would. And by the way, we're not actually guaranteed that. Like, we have the leaked list that showed us Orochi Kirin and Elatrion. We don't actually know if we're getting a new map. Anyways, I've been talking for quite a while now. Let's wrap things up finally. Problem number 10 was about the lack of new maps in Monster Hunter World. And those are my top 10 reasons why Monster Hunter World is losing its player base. Let me know if I've missed something. Let me know if you disagree with something on the list. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.